People who idolized someone they later found out was a piece of trash. What happened? I aspired to be as cool as Hyde in that 70s show at one point. He's in prison now for rape. He was also straight up a hitman for Scientology. He killed a guy's dog for criticizing the church. Wow. What did the dog say? Hey, you can still be as cool as the fictional character Hyde, who despite his rebellious attitude and small-time criminality actually was a good kid. Fuck his actor, though. All of the actors of the kids from that 70s show are extremely problematic people. Except Topher Grace. I had such a crush on Laura Prepon. I remember, too. Back in the day when Topher left and everyone was all that dude is an elitist prick now, he got all big and he's too big for the show. Yeah. That's real nice. Turns out he's like one of the few that didn't do anything awful at all. Hyde didn't go to prison for rape, Danny Masterson did. I think aspiring to be as cool as a character is okay. Tough to match Bill Cosby. America has never loved anyone as unanimously as Bill Cosby. The Cosby Show was the #1 show in the country. Rumors of him drugging women started to trickle out on the early internet. I was a kid in the 80s. My family watched The Cosby Show every week. Growing up, he was a wholesome dad figure on the level of Mr. Rogers. The betrayal felt personal. People don't understand he literally was on the level of Mr. Rogers. He was America's dad. He was the standard of positive masculinity for so many. Same. I watched picture pages. Fat Albert, The Cosby Show, the stand-up, all of it. Why did he have to be evil? He ruined so much nostalgia. Way back in the early era of YouTube when all the classic big names like Markiplier and PewDiePie were just getting their start, there was another big Let's Player who went by Cryotic and would often hang out with them and do videos together. Cry's style of Let's Play was a lot more chill and relaxed and he had a cute voice and funny sense of humor, so I actually liked his videos the most out of the three. His upload schedule slowed down after a while and he didn't seem to transition into the streamer era as well as other creators did. Then in 2019 he admitted to grooming several teenage girls behind his fiance's back. Yeah. I liked him and regularly watched his videos, and it really upset me. Used to constantly rewatch his Walking Dead playthrough when I was a kid while my parents were fighting. The news of what he did hit me like a truck. It might sound pathetic, but I genuinely cried. We're gonna see the usual names on this thread, so let's go with someone different. Greg Mortensen. You may remember him as the author who wrote 3 Cups of Tea. He captivated the post-9/11 world with his stories of traveling Afghanistan and Pakistan and building schools for girls. I actually met Greg at a fundraiser when I was very young and my family donated to the Central Asia Institute. It turns out my other childhood hero, Jon Krakauer, the guy who wrote Into Thin Air and Into the Wild, basically debunked his entire life story. Most of the schools were never built and Greg spent all his money traveling around on the non-profit circuit. This is incredibly ironic because in his book his initial backer, Gene Horney, warns Greg explicitly not to do this. Poor Gene died before he saw how right his initial suspicion was. It's honestly jaded me against non-profits ever since. Edit. Since this gained traction, I have to make a joke that 2011 Greg Mortensen vs. Jon Krakauer was like Duel of the Fates for suburban outdoorsy white guys. Epic times indeed. Edit 2. OMG, there's apparently a music video that Greg made with the money he embezzled. Credit goes to you/Meganom38 for this. Gem. Oh man, you just brought up a forgotten memory from high school. My English teacher was obsessed with 3 Cups of Tea, even tried to get the guy to come speak at our school. It did not go well when he found out it was made up. Had the same thing happen where that 60-minute special came out while we were in the process of reading the book. Got pretty awkward. Still remember one of my classmates exclaiming, "The cups of lies." You scared me. I thought you were about to out something about Krakauer. I was getting ready to cry and burn books. Nah. Krakauer is dope. I've read almost all his books. His biggest sin is that he is not diplomatic when he smells bullshit. His takedown of Greg Mortensen was not subtle. My favorite show was made by Joss Whedon, Buffy. My favorite author was Neil Gaiman. My favorite YouTuber back in the day was Cryotic. And one of my favorite bands back in high school was the Dresden Dolls. I am afraid to announce my favorite anything anymore. Edit. Because there are tons of replies asking about the Dresden Dolls, Amanda Palmer was married to Neil Gaiman and was basically, as someone phrased it brilliantly in another reply, his Hot Topic Ghislaine Maxwell. At least your favorite band wasn't the Lost Prophets. My ex-girlfriend has a picture of Ian Watkins with his arm around her. She was 14-year-old when the picture was taken. He died recently, got stabbed in prison, and it wasn't even his first stabbing. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. She was too old by then for that sick F***ck. I had a Lost Prophets t-shirt that just said megalols on it. Learned this week that Ian Watkins described his crimes as megalols after being arrested. On the plus side, he's burning in hell as we speak. And if there is no hell, I wouldn't be surprised if the universe mocked one up just for him. Give us your top 10 everything so we can start placing bets. I started to type, well, at least the video games I like seem to be okay, and then I remembered that I stopped playing World of Warcraft years ago because of Blizzard apparently being full to bursting with rapist frat boys, and I just, yikes, you're cursed. Neil Gaiman cut deep. Good Omens was my favorite book in the world. Pratchett would be so disappointed in him. Now there's a man I would have put money on. I tend to hold male celebrities at arm's length, especially after Gaiman, but I would stake my life that Terry Pratchett was a great man through and through. I'm prepared to die on that hill, but I would stake my life that Terry Pratchett was a great man through and through. I had dinner with Terry twice. His cousin is a good friend of mine's partner. She knew I liked him. Terry used to stay with his cousin instead of a hotel when he was in town. He was a diamond, funny, warm, a great listener, and liked to give other people space to talk. However good you think he'd be as a dinner guest, he was better than that. Dinner with Terry Pratchett? Damn, that's the dream. You lucky duck. I feel the same. I just replied to another comment. But I've been just telling myself that Good Omens was more Pratchett anyway, to cope. Although not my favorite or anything, curse. If you're listening, I've been reading them both for so long, I can very clearly tell which contributions each made to the story. And while it was most definitely a team effort, in fact, it was unfortunately the original brainchild of Gaiman, I can honestly say that all of my favorite parts were added by Pratchett, but I still haven't gotten to a place where I'm comfortable with revisiting it yet. It sucks when an artist does this. I'm not trying to be selfish because I know what he did to the rest of us nowhere near impacts what he did to his actual victims, but when your work touches this many lives, the choices you make affects everyone. It's really shitty. Chaotic hurt me so bad. Oof, Joss Whedon is a good shout. Made so many of my favorite shows as a teenager. Neil Gaiman still hurts. His work affected me in a deep and personal way, and as ridiculous as it might sound, I mourn the ability to enjoy his work the way I used to. I'm not a big reader, and he was one of the few authors who got me excited to sit down with a book for a few hours to escape. Idolized my father as a kid. Then I met his two previous kids, the ones he abandoned and refused to pay child support for, even while his ex-wife was on her deathbed from cancer. Not cause he was poor and couldn't afford it, but because he wanted to climb the ladder of success. Joke was on him. He hid his assets from his first wife by putting his house fully in the name of his second wife, who got to keep the whole house after his divorce. As for my mother, I never idolized her cause she sexually abused me as a kid. If I ever have kids, which is unlikely, they're getting their mother's last name and I'm telling them that my parents were environmental activists or something. Can't wait to throw away every one of my father's family photos after he dies. I fantasize about it every day. That's a lot of trauma. I hope you're okay. Wishing you the best. Turns out my favorite high school English teacher was a pedo. He's now in jail. He taught me to write well, and to enjoy writing. 3 years after his class and I tied for highest honors in English. I still write for fun. And now 30 years later a major part of who I am is tied to that a person. We had a somewhat similar situation at our school. Our HS principal was pretty popular amongst the kids. However, he had a year-end party for the cheerleaders each year at his house on the lake. And my junior, I think a year, one of the girls noticed a light shining through the mirror in a bathroom. It turned out he had been recording the girls changing, and it had likely been going on for years. Year-end party for the cheerleaders. Okay, that's weird. All the teams for the year maybe, but just the cheerleaders? Seriously, depending on how long ago OP was in high school. How TF did that not raise red flags with the school/everyone? People just don't care or turn a blind eye. During COVID it came out that the coach at my brother's old high school was grooming and abusing the athletes for like 20 years. When the story broke out in the local news, thing that should have been massive red flags in people's faces had been ignored. Students got the creeps from him. Students for decades would often say he was a pervert and make jokes. Nobody who went to that school was surprised when the news of an investigation broke out. He had hot tub parties at his house in evenings and weekends. Other members of the faculty and the teenagers' parents all knew of these parties. Everyone allowed their own fucking kids go off with a grown-ass man for hot tub parties and other special training days individually. So much failure to protect these boys because they were athletes. Not only that, but some of them were pressured by their parents to go to these things. And why did the parents do this? They were under the belief their kid was special and going to make it to the big leagues. So when they were asked about hot tub parties with a grown man and a bunch of underage kids, they said sure, it'll help their future. Did he go to jail? Yep, but only for 6 months, plus 3 years probation and community service. Dude, got off light, considering the crime. They always do. I have a very similar experience. She was my mentor in middle school and the person that made me want to become a teacher myself. Years later I found out she had stayed in touch, groomed, with one of my classmates. And well, they say she waited until he was 18, but I don't really believe it. She knew him from 11. A handful of musicians I really liked in my teens and 20s turned out to be perverts. I was very disappointed when it was revealed that Lance Armstrong had been doping for most of his career, and had forced others to do it. I had believed his book when he wrote about his natural attributes to make him a great cyclist. I threw out all my Livestrong stuff and his book. Man, those Livestrong bracelets used to be on every other person. Well, I didn't idolize him but definitely looked up to him, guy I went to college with and were still in the same friend group many years later. Kind of. We knew he wasn't the greatest guy in the world and then, served in Congress and while in DC he cheated on his wife, the mother of his 3 young children. Often, she found out when her gyno told her she had an STD. He became governor of my state and early in his 3rd term had to accept a plea deal with the feds. Resign, go to federal prison. He learned nothing. Basically told the feds, catch me if you can, they did. He went back to federal prison again. Roland, he went to my high school, before my time though. My high school does not have a good track record when it comes to politicians. Yep, Neil Gaiman was nearly universally revered. The very credible allegations against him are horrific. I remember a time where Will and Jada Pinkett Smith was held up as one of the few examples of a strong celebrity marriage. Everything I've learned about the Smith family has been against my will. Jada seems like a narcissistic arsehole while Will treats his family as an extension of his ego. Seeing his drop-off has been a bit sad though. He should be in his legacy era now but the slap mixed with his false apology has ruined any comeback. The world has moved on from him but he appears to be the only one who hasn't got the memo. Everything I've learned about the Smith family has been against my will. His too. My sister used to listen to the Lost Prophets. The lead singer was recently murdered in prison in the UK. He was a deeply disturbed pedophile who targeted the babies of his female fans who were single mothers. I had finally gotten clean again and stayed that way 3 weeks when he decided to give me a surprise because I'd done so well. 2 loaded up shots for a night off. Didn't sleep for 4 days after that. He knew what he was doing. It was the same weekend he introduced me to another drug to add in so I could sleep. Bet you can guess what that was. I was easier to control when I was using. He pulled this more than once because I'd get clean and decide I no longer deserved to have my bones broken on the regular. I was too depressed from it all to say no when he would put it in front of me. I left 4 months ago. I haven't used since very shortly after I left. Fuck you, Steve. May your next time being Narcan feel like a bullet to the chest, just like my last one did. Fuck Steve. I hope your life gets back to where it should be. What you did is incredibly difficult. From one internet stranger to another, I'm so proud of you. I also have a Steve. FUCK Steves. I'm glad you're out of that now. My friend's cousin went through a similar situation and she said as hard as drug withdrawal was, it was a distant second in withdrawing from her abusive ex. Drugs won't be knocking on your door at 3 a.m. when you're alone and feeling like you've lost your normal. She is 14 years away from it, happy in her wee house and pottering about in her beautiful garden. She'll usually gift me more courgettes than I can reasonably carry home. But I love it. She's a wonderful human being with so much compassion and even more self-respect. You'll get to your happiness. Trust in yourself, because you've already shown the grit and determination to succeed in achieving your goals. I'm rooting for you. A mangaka from Japan came over to Honolulu and opened a manga workshop for potential students. I signed up, and was one of the 8 or 9. Since the mangaka was Japanese and didn't speak any English, and I was the only one who spoke Japanese, my mom's Japanese, I was made the interpreter/representative despite being the youngest of the group, and I hadn't even graduated then. At first, I agreed to the task, but here's the thing, I didn't know all these jargons and terms used by mangaka. That's one of the reasons why I signed up to the class in the first place. And I was new to digital drawing, I didn't have a tablet back then, so I wasn't doing a good job at it. And he'd chew me out for making his lessons not go smoothly. Just to be clear, I wasn't being paid for it. He also made me translate documents and such for other things. And I helped out, but over time, I came to the realization that he was just using me. He even tried to make me get a job as a tutor at the place where he held his classes, and tried to take my pay. But since I wanted to focus on my studies, I declined, which he wasn't too pleased about. I later confronted him, and when I told him that I'm not his servant, he snapped back at me, saying that he wasn't being paid to teach us at all. Ultimately, I just dipped from that group and went no contact with that asshole. Edit. I wasn't being paid for it. I had a similar experience working for a Japanese musician whom I had really admired. He wasn't hugely famous or anything, but he was well respected within a small subgenre of a subgenre because a band he had been in previously were considered progenitors of that style. He ended up being, in one word, mean. When I started work, I made very clear I had no experience. I was still a student, barely out of my teens, but I was a quick learner with a good attitude. I was thrown in the deep end with no guidance whatsoever and torn down every time I screwed up. And everything I did was screwing up. There were unexplained rules, and they were constantly changing. I first thought he had hired me to be a token gaijin, but when I reflect more on it, I think it was because I was so starstruck and eager to please that I was easy to bully. His bandmates were much kinder and more humble, but I never forgot his cruelty. It fucked me up for a long time. I truly started to believe that I was stupid, a failure, couldn't follow directions. I wonder if it is the root of my persistent imposter syndrome. Anyway, I take comfort in the fact that none of his projects have ever risen to the level of that very first seminal band, and they never will because he keeps losing bandmates. Probably on account of being such a shriveled little dick. Edit. Please stop trying to guess. I can confidently assure you that it's not your fave. The person, the band, the genre, were all very niche, even at the height of the zeitgeist. I'm also most likely much older than you and am referring to an entirely different time period than what you're thinking. Pixar was the storytelling studio from 1995 to 2010, and John Lasseter was one of the main people behind that. He revitalized Disney after that, and turned it into a juggernaut. His storytelling instincts were second to none. I used to listen to everything I could find where he talked about storytelling in order to be a better writer. When it came out that he was a creep, it was very hard on me. I guess he was just a creep. Compared to so many other people who were cancelled, he just edged into making people uncomfortable territory. Still, it ruined my perception of him. Similarly, Kevin Spacey was my favorite actor. John Lasseter touched women's thighs under the table at office meetings, to the point that young women were told not to go into the conference room because they distracted him. This meant their careers were kneecapped. How can you rise in the company if you're not in the room where it happens? He also had handlers at office parties because he had a habit of French kissing unconsenting women. Pair that with the stinky Pete outtake of trying to casting couch a couple Barbies, and a fully animated scene of Syndrome trying to French the spy lady as an inside joke. And you can see how Pixar aided and abetted a serial harasser. I also wonder what really happened with Brave's original director, who was fired/quit halfway through production. Brenda Chapman was Pixar's first female director ever and has remained tight-lipped about what actually went down. I just wonder if that environment wasn't conducive to having a female at the head. In 2002, I worked at this fancy restaurant with a piano bar attached. The very hot bartender had spent a decade trying to break into acting before he came back home to learn filmmaking. He would have been late 20s at the time. He told me this story about how he was at this big party with a bunch of Hollywood stars and it was in the middle of nowhere. He was pretty drunk and was having a hard time finding a cab when Kevin Spacey offered him a ride, and spent the entire drive fending off Spacey's advances. He would have been early 20s. He was not homophobic but was so very creeped out. When those allegations came out, I was not surprised. I grew up wanting to work at Pixar because of all the inspiring people there. But one by one they were revealed to be bad men or they enabled and stood by the bad men. Lance Armstrong got interviewed by Oprah. I knew he was a dirtbag because in the early 1990s he would come to Bloomington, Indiana to train and he was pretty openly cheating on his wife with undergrads. Man, the guy got around. I was also an undergrad but in the late 90s in Texas. And we knew a girl he had cheated with shamelessly. I was a really big Kanye fan until he said slavery was a choice and then it got worse. That's a remarkable phrase to start a dissent with, isn't it? Hey, let him cook. Maybe we can come back from this. Maybe we were more naive and hopeful in a pre-COVID world, huh? Kanye is a cautionary tale for take your meds. Legitimately psychotic and now believes all manner of insane things. He was supposed to be on antipsychotics before it got so bad. This actually makes me sad. He's a walking billboard for why mental health should be taken more seriously. But he literally can't be helped because he's too unstable to listen to reason. People around him also likely kept him off meds. He made them money. He had, yes, men around him that he wouldn't be supporting if he was in his right mind. so they had a monetary incentive to keep him off his meds. If he was broke, he would have probably gotten help ironically. In my early 20s, I made this friend. He was really cool, with an exciting job. He was super kind to me when I was going through a hard time. We messaged every day. He would even send me presents and not let me pay him back. When we'd been friends for about 3 years, he suddenly cut off a lot of friends, including me. He later told me he was having a mental breakdown. It was hard to accept, because I thought he and I had been uniquely special to each other, and I was a little bit in love with him. I assumed because I was autistic and had depression, I wasn't cool enough for him, and he had dropped me from his life because he was sick of pitying me or whatever. Years later, he added me back on social media. We got talking and he was complimenting me a lot. We were having a lot of really good conversation. Back to being really good friends. We arranged to meet. It was like love at first sight. We became a couple right away. It was magical. We had this sense of life has led me to you. He introduced me to his parents a couple of weeks later. He told me I was the best girlfriend he'd ever had and he wanted to be with me forever. He was the best partner I'd ever had. For 3 months. One day I didn't want to have sex. I said I adored him and loved our sex life. I was just depressed that day. And he kicked off. After that he was cold with me. The loving messages throughout the day stopped. Sometimes he'd just disappear and not explain it. He started flirting with waitresses in front of me, even calling them by the pet name he called me. He would buy me little presents like a fridge magnet, without me asking, then complain about how much money he spent. He told me his parents had said I was cold and arrogant, and when I asked his parents if I'd done anything wrong, they said they loved me. He was obsessed with the idea that I thought I was too good for him. He had full-on delusions that I had said he was ugly and mocked his career, things that categorically didn't happen, or even resemble anything that happened. He became obsessed with telling me I was a horrible person. When we were out together, he would walk meters out in front of me. I am 99% certain he was still talking to his ex, even though he told me she was stupid and boring and he was embarrassed to be seen with her. Our last weekend together, I was staying with him and I had a killer migraine and had to mostly stay in bed. He gave me the silent treatment all day. I had done nothing to anger him, but he didn't speak to me, didn't let me get food from the kitchen, etc. Because of the migraine, I couldn't leave and drive home. I broke up with him after a month of seeing how bad he was after the love bombing ended. He didn't try to win me back, but he checked my social media obsessively until I blocked him. Then he made up fake accounts to harass me. Within 3 weeks of me breaking up with him, he got back with his ex and messaged me a picture of them together. That lasted for about a week. Now he is dating a drug addict with severe mental health problems, who looks like a late-stage Amy Winehouse. She looks so vulnerable and I now see him as being predatory. When I think about what a wonderful friend he was for years, I feel in shock. How can they be the same person? It's chilling that most people who meet him still think he is one of the nicest people in the entire world. It's funny, I just commented this earlier. You never really know somebody if you haven't dated them. Everyone thinks my ex is the nicest dude ever. And to be fair, he does go out of his way to do nice things for strangers sometimes. But behind closed doors he was a POS. I'd add, if you're their child, you see the ugly too. Kevin Spacey was my favorite living actor. Now I can't bear to look at him. I was a huge Base Nectar fan. Then it came out that he's a serial groomer/creep. I deleted all my saved songs, got rid of merch, etc. The EDM scene basically cancelled him and rejected all of his comeback attempts. Good riddance. There/was a void in the community with him gone though. Nectar was my favorite EDM artist by a long shot. Grizz has come close, although he had a long hiatus. Thankfully Grizz is finally coming back to the scene, so that's nice. James Watson, of Watson and Crick. When I was studying to be a molecular biologist, I thought he was all that. I met him a few years into my career. A complete heel, jerk, and sleaze. A lot of the big names in science are only big because of an extensive campaign of self-marketing. And it turns out the type people who will do that also tend to be total fucking narcissists. A complete heel, jerk, and sleaze. Rosalind Franklin would agree. I read his book and he feel no remorse of stealing her work. I idolized Elon Musk until he offered to build a submarine to save those kids trapped in the cave, and the leader of the rescue effort declined his offer, so Elon called him a pedophile on Twitter. I was like, wait, the version of Elon that lives in my head would never do something that petty. And then it just got worse and worse as he got increasingly more comfortable revealing his true nature. Now I really hope he just gets on one of his rockets and heads to Mars and gets lost along the way. That was the turning point for me. That was when my suspicion that he is a huge asshole and a fraud were confirmed. I was never a huge Elon fan, but I respected that he was at least trying to help and seemed to be pursuing some good ideas. But he always did seem kind of arrogant, and some of his ideas were the same shit you read about in Popular Mechanics while sitting on the toilet. Cool idea, but logistically far-fetched. Then that petty shit with the rescue diver because he hurt Elon's ego. Fuck that guy. Stole a good amount of money from me when I was going through very bad depression. The money hurts less than ending a 37-year friendship and making it awkward for all the families involved. My older brother. He was always the coolest guy I knew. Had his life together. It always seemed like everything went his way. Was good at sports, school. Had lots of friends, dated pretty girls. We grew up and both had families of our own and remained close. I always felt like I struggled to keep it all together. Yet he owned his own successful business. Had a huge house. A wife he was devoted to. Great kids. A couple of summers ago he went through a divorce. A few months after the divorce he and I went on a trip to Vegas. It was the two of us, and one of his friends, and one of my friends. He and his friend would go to Vegas together a couple of times a year. For about a decade. Our first night there, after a 10-hour drive, we gambled for a bit. And headed to his condo around 1 a.m. I was ready for bed and he and his friend were going back out. He didn't really say why, but his friend blurted it out. There was a massage parlor that they would frequent that was also a brothel. They'd each go get a massage and then pay an extra $100 to have sex with the women who worked there. His friend added, "We've been going here for years." That's when I realized the guy who I looked up to the most had been cheating on his wife for years. At that moment he understood that by his friend saying this out loud, that I knew he was a cheater. He looked at me with shame and said, "Yeah, your brother is a scumbag." I still love my brother, but I've never looked at him the same way. Russell Brand. Used to be humble yet hilarious. Witty beyond belief in his old radio shows and his British Ponderland show. I met my hero in an airport. He was kind and charming and genuinely empathetic to me. They say never meet your heroes, but I was so happy I met mine. Turned out to be a disgusting sycophant who kisses the rings of the worst people on the planet. What a disappointment. I didn't idolize them at all, but I liked Die Antwoord's music. It was fun and catchy. Then he turned out to be a huge asshole. Homophobe, pedophile and abusive. Haven't heard one of their songs in years. Yeah, I liked them. I even saw them in concert once. Then I heard about their behavior on the Chappie set. And then it just kept getting worse from there. Louis C.K. The minute I read his apology, it was clear to me that he was the kind of creep who was getting off on the getting away with it part, and I never wanted to hear his voice. Even spoken through others, again. I thought you/M Fluxskywalker was awesome for taking his resemblance to episodes 7 to 9 old Luke Skywalker and using it to entertain children. He showed up for sick kids. He was involved in fundraisers for good causes. He shared the spotlight with the 501st Legion and he always looked like he was having a lot of fun. Always doing it for the kids. Then he was arrested after having been discovered with child pornography on his phone. And he killed himself before trial. I want to feel so bad for him, but I'm too busy feeling horrified. I haven't been able to fully accept the Neil Gaiman accusations yet, probably because of how influential he was on teenage me. He's such an interesting example of the broken stair theory. I have a bunch of friends who aren't in the same poly/kink community as he and his, now ex-wife were, but were in, I guess, a tangential one. So occasionally one of them would show up at, I dunno, an art opening or something for one of my friends or friends of friends. And they all knew. Maybe not every detail, but they all knew bad news, stay away. But you had to know people to know. When the accusations came out, it was basically like, yup, there it is, and I was surprised how many people I knew weren't at all surprised. I cited that dude in my MA thesis. I'm right there with you. The fact that Gaiman's public response has largely not been denial has helped me accept it. Really disappointing, especially considering the subject matter he wrote. I can still enjoy some of his work, but stuff like Sandman is irreparably harmed and I want to seek out more of his work. Pretty much every old rock star, John Lennon and Jim Morrison, were people I looked up to when I was in high school. Eventually, I learned about who they really were and it sucked. Jim Morrison in particular. I still love that Janis Joplin smashed one of her always-on-hand bottles of Southern Comfort over Morrison's head when he got too damn handsy, once. There's so many that slept with 14-year-olds. I think of it every time I hear a song by Red Hot Chili Peppers, for example, but there are a lot of others. I'm old, so crushing on Sean Connery and later hearing him explain how you sometimes need to hit a woman to get her to fall in line. Chris Benoit, small guy in a big man's world who pushed himself constantly to try and make it. I felt the same, was always the smallest dude, out all the people around me, and it always felt like they were ahead of me. Perseverance was something I wanted to copy. Those last moments of his life as well, learning he actually quite abusive towards his wife, make it impossible to look at him the same.